Hello again everyone. The Samyang Optics lens company have been very busy indeed recently, launching new lenses for various systems, and here's one of them, the Samyang 50mm f1.2 AS UMC CS. It's designed for cameras with a smaller APS-C sized sensor and for mirrorless cameras only, not digital SLRs. So it's available for Fuji X cameras, Canon EOS M and Sony E mount, and for micro four thirds cameras as well, I believe. This is a Sony E mount version of the lens, which Samyang have kindly provided to me for testing. Thank you, Samyang. Although, as usual, this is a totally independent review. It's a pretty exciting lens in a lot of ways. For about £350 or $450 US, you can get a compact-sized portrait lens with an extremely fast maximum aperture of f1.2. That's about 30% extra brightness from an f1.4 lens, so you can get noticeably faster shutter speeds for shooting in dark situations, and more interestingly, it opens up some very out of focus backgrounds indeed for you, and potentially beautiful images. This lens was born for portrait work and otherwise creative photography. Its main disadvantage is that it's a fully manual lens, manual focus and manual aperture. The 50mm focal length is the full frame equivalent of about 75mm, so manually focusing will take a little care, but really it's easy enough, especially with modern digital cameras and all their focusing aids. After a bit of practice, manually focusing is not an issue unless you're dealing with a particularly fast-moving subject. The focus ring itself turns very smoothly indeed, so it's quite enjoyable to use, but I feel it could be just a little more precise. The aperture ring also manages to turn quite smoothly while still clicking positively every half stop. Generally, the lens feels very solid indeed, being made of a combination of metal and high-quality plastics. The filter thread of the lens is 62mm and it comes with a free lens hood. Samyang lenses have always had quite good build quality, but their new mirrorless lenses seem to have been tightened up even more. It's a real pleasure to use. Let's see about image quality. For this test, I've borrowed a 24MP Sony A6000 camera. At that fast maximum aperture of f1.2, the lens is fairly sharp in the middle of the image, with just a touch of purple fringing. To be expected, really. Let's see about the corners, and, well, for such a wide aperture, they're not bad at all. We're seeing a little colour fringing here, but considering we're working on a 24MP camera, sharpness is actually fairly good. Stopping down just a little to f1.4 makes a tiny difference in the corners, but back in the middle, we already see a more noticeable increase in sharpness. At f2, the image is pretty much perfect in the middle. However, stop the lens down to f2.8, we see awesome picture quality now in the corners. That's something I've noticed about pretty much all Samyang lenses. Stop them down to f2.8 and they're ridiculously sharp. Anyway, that sharpness continues down to f8. At about f11, diffraction is starting to kick in and the image finally starts to get a little softer. Well, overall, I would say the Samyang 50mm f1.2 gives a very good performance for such an extremely wide aperture lens. The middle is always sharp, and even the corners are not bad, and once you stop down to f2.8, sharpness reigns supreme. For such a small lens at this price point, it's pretty impressive. Let's see about distortion and vignetting. It's good news here too. The lens appears to be free of distortion, and even at f1.2, vignetting is not too high. Stop down to f2 and the vignetting is virtually gone, those corners look nice and bright. Great. The lens can focus as closely as about 48cm, about an average distance for this kind of lens. The good news is that close-up image quality at f1.2 is pretty good and remains quite sharp as you stop down. Let's see now about work against bright lights. Well, the Samyang lens puts in a bit of an average performance here. We don't see very much direct flaring, which is good, but contrast is very low when bright lights are directly in a picture. That's quite typical for a portrait lens though. Finally, bokeh. This lens can give you some very out of focus backgrounds indeed, of course, and the quality of those backgrounds is generally nice and smooth. Occasionally, they can look a tiny bit smudgy though. Overall, the Samyang 50mm f1.2 for mirrorless cameras is a very good optic indeed, especially considering its low price. It's a nice, sharp lens with good build quality and very little distortion or vignetting. Anyone with an APS-C mirrorless camera will really want to consider this very capable portrait lens for their kit bag. It comes recommended.